This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Okay. I've done everything I possibly could to get myself in a good mood before I have to talk about SummerSlam 1996. After having watched that pay-per-view over the weekend and just being immersed with a sudden urge to want to strangle somebody, I figured I was going to need a good Sunday morning detox. So here I sit, had a good night's sleep, woke up fresh and relatively happy, brewed myself a nice cup of hot joe, took a quick warm shower to cleanse the sorrows. The question is, how long will it be before all that happiness goes out the window? Approximately now. But actually, that's a false start. I was going to use that as my segue into the pay-per-view recap, but first I have to sit here and go over all the boring details and tell all the viewers to make sure you subscribe, comment, like the show. We are the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays to bring you classic wrestling coverage. It's a big Monday show today because we've got a lot of history to dive into. History that really presented just how truly awful things were for the WWF during this time frame about 29 years ago. And so, without further ado, since I know this is going to be a longer show, we also have Retro Raw we have to talk about as well. Well, let's get into things and see how rapidly my good mood changes, even with a fresh cup of coffee. Well, the time has come. I've been patiently stewing over how I even wanted to break down this colossal train wreck of a pay-per-view. To be honest with you, I'm still not entirely sure how it's going to pan out. Let me just start by saying, I absolutely hate this show. Having gone back to rewatch bits and pieces of the thing throughout the years, specifically the main event, I've never been able to get over just how much I truly detest everything this pay-per-view represented. I know the show had what many people consider a SummerSlam classic, the Undertaker-Mankind Boiler Room Brawl. I'll get to my thoughts on that later. But for the purpose of me trying to drive home a point, that main event with Shawn Michaels and Vader left such a bitter taste in my mouth after it was over. It still overshadowed anything I could have considered remotely good about this event. And trust me, there really wasn't a whole lot of good to begin with on this pay-per-view. The undercard certainly didn't do anything to enhance the quality. Tell you something, if this wasn't a bad omen for what was to come later in the night, there was a dark match they aired right before the pay-per-view started with Steve Austin and Yokozuna. And about a minute into the match, Yoko tried to do the bonsai drop and ended up breaking the top rope. So, yeah, that was a thing. I said it was a bad omen for the rest of the pay-per-view. It was also a bad omen for the remainder of Yoko's WWF run. We'll revisit talking about him when we do the Raw report. So anyway, I'll do the usual card rundown, talk about everything in full, and hopefully not spend an hour ranting about the underwhelming prelim stuff. The only two things on this show people ever talk about is Taker Mankind and Shawn Vader. A lot of the other matches on this card were certified Raw main events. Not even. But they were at the Gund Arena in Cleveland, Ohio for this thing. My now current neck of the woods. I was still living in Pittsburgh during this time, but now that I've migrated and moved closer to the Cleveland area, I guess you could now consider this my home area. I don't actually live in Cleveland, for the record. I'm not that much of an idiot. Probably about 20 minutes out from the main city. That's as close as I ever want to get to it. For the record, I have no idea if the Gund Arena is still around. It's been 30 years, so chances are if the building does still exist currently, it's been renamed and or renovated since then. I think they actually sold the place out for this event, which is maybe not all that surprising for a seating capacity somewhere in the ballpark of 17,000. Now, let's be blunt though, for the WWF during this time, that was strongly considered an achievement. So the actual opener for the card was Owen Hart versus Savio Vega. By the way, it was Vince, JR, and Kurt Hennig on commentary to call the action, since Lawler was wrestling. I still don't like the three-person commentary teams, but, you know, the WWF was constantly experimenting with this stuff back in '96. It kind of started with them letting the wrestlers and managers do the ringside commentary for certain segments, and now it's kind of molded into three-person announce booths. And they're still doing it today. Not to skip ahead here, but since we're on the topic of the commentators, there was actually a great back and forth between JR and Kurt Hennig in this match. They had gotten on the subject of Bret Hart. Mr. Perfect started mentioning how he wrestled Bret at SummerSlam. SummerSlam 91, for those that were unaware, the night Bret became the Intercontinental Champion for the first time. So they're talking about that. And of course, without missing a beat, the minute Hennig brings up SummerSlam in the match with Bret, JR goes, "Oh yeah, I remember that match. That's when Bret beat you for the Intercontinental Championship." To which Hennig responds, "He didn't beat me. He, well..." Then he just started calling the action as Owen was continuing to work over Savio. Admittedly, for situations like that, that is the only time I would ever excuse a three-person commentary team. When the babyface color commentator makes the heel color commentator look like a jackass. The only exception to the rule. So, Did I ever mention how great Owen Hart was? Yeah, he was pretty damn phenomenal. It's the subtle things Owen did during his matches, man. Especially as a heel. The self-serving, pompous gestures. Remember, the whole story with Owen right now is that he's wearing an arm cast. Everybody, including the announcers, know the whole thing is bullshit and he's not really injured. He's just trying to look for excuses to cheat when he can. But then Owen will constantly complain when somebody's working over his bad arm, claiming it's unfair. I also love this thing he does. It's completely random, but it always makes me laugh. He'll do something dastardly to one of the baby faces, and then he'll just do the double fist pump in the air and go, woo! Not the Ric Flair woo, but woo, I did it. It's so cornball, but you gotta love it. Owen was an absolute gem, man. We were robbed. So Owen and Savio are going back and forth throughout the match. Everything they're doing is perfectly fine, albeit there's not really much of a storyline to anything we're seeing here. Again, it's a glorified TV match that people are being forced to pay to see, but at least the action's good. At one point, while they're trading some near-fall spots, Clarence Mason started making his way down the aisleway to play cheerleader for Owen. This is also where I noticed the fully dressed man in the Goldust cosplay outfit. Makeup included. And let me just say, any grown man deciding to cosplay as Goldust in 1996, especially in a public setting where cameras were present, poor life choices. So they eventually get to the spot where Owen gets crushed going up top, but as Savio goes to give Owen the back suplex, he ends up coming down and smacking the back of his head off Owen's cast, which is actually a clever spot. And it set up the heat finish where Owen was playing possum as Savio went to pick him up, but then Owen took off his cast and used it to knock out Savio. Granted, he did this right in front of the official. How in the fuck it wasn't a DQ, I couldn't tell you. But Owen eventually locked in the sharpshooter and got the knockout win. Also making sure to raise his fist in the air because Owen Hart was, did I mention, fucking great. And I mean, yeah, I'll go ahead and say it right now. This is my favorite match of the night. And I know that'll immediately rub people the wrong way because that implies that I liked it more than the Boiler Room match. You would be correct in that assertion. But just in terms of strict old school professional wrestling without all the theatrics and overproduction, I mean, this is easily the best match in the pay-per-view, am I wrong? I probably could have done without seeing Bradshaw come out and sucker punch Savio in the back of the head. I don't know what that was all about. Apparently Bradshaw was pissed off that he lost a tag match on Superstars to Savio and Freddie Joe Floyd. You know, actually, come to think of it, I'd probably be pretty embarrassed about that too. Losing a match where Freddie Joe Floyd is involved. I could see where JBL was coming from. You know what else I probably could have done without? Watching Todd Pettingill walk around the boiler room taking note of pipes and things. That was almost a direct quote. He was admiring the environment of the boiler room in the Gund Arena. And he was correct. There were most definitely pipes and things hanging about. That's typically what one might find inside a boiler room. So congrats to Todd. First time checking out the basement of a huge venue. He also found Mankind sitting on the floor in the fetal position, but to him that was less impressive than the pipes. So then we had the 4-team elimination match with all the prelim guys. And this is where I just started trying to pass the time by jotting down all the classic tag teams we saw from the previous 5 to 10 years. You know, names like the Road Warriors, the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, the Hart Foundation, Tully and Arn, Steiners, Demolition. Keep in mind, all these tag teams that I just mentioned, they were active in the business within the last 5 to 10 years. I'm not even including names like the Briscoes, the Funk Brothers, the Fargos, Ray Stevens and Nick Bockwinkel. I could go on and on and on. The point I'm trying to make here is what the WWF had to work with in 1996. Their so-called top main event tag teams. The 4 best teams that they had under contract vying for the World Wrestling Federation tag team titles. Those names included the Body Donnas, the Godwins, the New Rockers, and the Smoking Guns. Need I say any more? Do you see the issue here? Yeah, the issue is that the tag team division in 1996 sucked. As did this match, but I probably didn't need to tell you that. This match also had that completely asinine tag rule where anybody could tag anybody at any point, including 2 guys that are on the same team, which meant that partners were forced to wrestle each other. And I've always hated this rule because, logically speaking, number one, why would tag partners volunteer to wrestle each other? That completely defeats the purpose of how you win the fucking match. And number two, even if tag partners were stupid enough to actually lock up and wrestle one another, what would prevent them from just tagging back out? Can anybody answer me that? What's forcing them to continue to stay in the ring and wrestle each other? There's 6 other limp dick bodies standing on the apron playing with themselves. Just tag one of them. It's not that hard. I really hope you don't actually expect me to sit here and go move for move to describe everything that happened. The crowd mostly sat there in silence. I have no idea why Chris Candido was out there in a fucking neck brace. That was never explained. It eventually came down to the Guns and the Hog Farmers. Vince could not for the life of him get Henry Godwin's name right. First, he accidentally called him Phineas. And like 10 seconds later, he called him Hank. God. Some things never change, man. Vince McMahon in names. If you are not an important guy on the roster, good luck with Vince remembering who the hell you were. So Phineas made a sloppy comeback on the Guns. No pun intended. He gave Billy the slop drop. But while Hillbilly Jim was chasing after Sonny with a bucket of slop, Bart came off the top and clubbed Phineas from behind so he could roll Billy on top for the pin. I wrote in all caps, "Fuck this match and everything about it." Horrible. I don't even want to linger on it. One of the worst SummerSlam matches I've ever seen. The only redeeming part was when they showed the drop-down poster of Sunny showing off her breasticles, which had to have been their way of saying, we know this match is going to blow chunks. Is there any possible way we can get a reaction out of people by the end? Here's an idea. Let's show a semi-revealing poster of Sunny doing a boob pose. Good save. So, well, it was at that point that I had to get up to take a shit. Got a really bad stomach virus from having watched that tag match. And I came back in the room right as they were about to ring the bell for Sid Vicious versus the British Bulldog. This did not help to quell my stomach bug. I love Sid. Never had anything against Davey Boy, but again, man, the conversation goes back to the topic of pay-per-view versus TV matches. I know there's history between Sid and various members of Camp Cornette, but if I'm booking Sid versus Bulldog, I'm not putting that on pay-per-view and expecting people to pay full price for it. I don't care how over Sid was. That's not a pay-per-view caliber match. I'm sorry. And there's no personal issue between these two specifically that's ever been addressed on TV. Remember, Sid was a last-minute fill-in for that 6-man tag at In Your House after the Warrior thing fell through. He wasn't even originally advertised for that pay-per-view. And it's not to say this is a bad or even mediocre match. It was just highly uninteresting and completely unmemorable. I'll give Sid credit for selling his ass off for Bulldog. I mean, he took more bumps in this match than I think he took during the entirety of 1989 when he was still a part of the Skyscrapers. But like the whole thing with Cornette coming out at the very end and getting into the altercation with Clarence, which basically wound up costing Bulldog the match. I don't know. They're obviously trying to tease dissension between the two now that they got Clarence Mason managing Crush. And as we'll see later on, he'll end up becoming Farouk's manager, or as they're about to kickstart the Nation to domination. So they're trying to obviously phase him away from Camp Cornette full-time. I don't remember anything about how that split officially happened. I think Clarence ends up managing Owen and Davey after this, but I don't know. It's been years. This shit is all a blur to me at this point. I wish Goldust versus Mark Merrow was all a blur to me. Unfortunately, that feud seemed to become an interminable program in the WWF over the next couple years. On and off. I still can't even recall offhand what prompted this match to be booked. Unless they shot something between these two during the month of June or early July, then I'm out to lunch. Based on the video package they aired, the feud seemed to be more about Mankind's obsession with Sable. It's funny too, because the Goldust Mero feud was something they revisited after this. I have no idea why anybody thought we needed to see these two touch after watching this match. They really never had any chemistry in the ring together. Frankly, Mero never had chemistry with anybody he ever worked with. There were like 2 or 3 moments in this match where Mero almost got dropped right on top of his head or neck, taking stupid bumps. The crowd just... I don't even know how to describe the way they reacted to Marc Mero. I mean, he certainly wasn't over with them. I think most people were conflicted because they really wanted to like Sable, so they wouldn't outright boo Mero whenever he was wrestling or involved in a segment with her. They just didn't react to him. You know, unless he did something flashy or something cool, he would get the occasional pop. But they're out there having this dreary match where the crowd is virtually lifeless. You know, I mentioned the series of moments throughout the match where Mero nearly paralyzed himself by landing on his head. He almost gave himself the Brock Lesnar shooting star press spot where he didn't get the full rotation and came down very close to landing on top of his head. Thankfully, Goldust was able to cushion the blow a little bit. And then some other stuff happened. Goldust eventually won with a curtain call DDT. Pretty much clean from what I remember. The Mankind run-in where he came down to taunt Sable, calling her mommy. I don't remember any of that shit. Did Mankind feud with Marc Mero after this? I mean, that had to have been a TV blow-off, because that seems like a hell of a downgrade considering what they have Mankind doing right now. Not only feuding with The Undertaker, but, you know, he's also wrestling Shawn for the belt at In Your House next month. To go from that to feuding with Marc fucking Mero? Whose Cheerios did Foley piss in? He must have had heat with The Office. But yeah, this is another complete waste of time and effort. Sable's acting was comically bad. Anytime she had to fake cry, it was just... It was laughable. She was better off as the stone-faced, expressionless blonde with fake tits and lip filler. Not really my flavor, but at least it was more true to her bland personality, instead of having to watch her pretend act. She was no Tammy Sitch. I'll say that much. And I'm not just bringing her up because she was also a part of the next segment they aired. I don't necessarily know why we needed a live in-ring Farouk promo in the middle of this pay-per-view, but nevertheless, we got one. And I guess my main critique in all this... Well, first of all, I don't want to jump ahead. They talked about Ahmed Johnson being stripped of the Intercontinental title. Farouk's all bent out of shape that Gorilla Monsoon isn't just handing him the IC title since he was responsible for doing something that nobody in the WWF could. And it's a good heel promo, despite how ridiculous Ron looks in that fucking gladiator apparel. The minute Sunny called him her little gladiator, and she completely exposed just how rotten the whole thing was. Here's what I never understood about the whole Sunny Farouk dynamic. Why did Farouk need Sunny as a manager? The guy could already talk his ass off. He was well-spoken. He could carry a promo by himself. Like, yeah, Sunny would fill in occasionally and try to be his hype man. A lot of the time, though, she just kind of stood there and smiled. I never got the reasoning behind needing to give Ron a mouthpiece. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe Sunny would be considered eye candy more than anything in this case, but, I mean, you see what I'm getting at. Anyway, we'll touch on the whole IC title situation when we do the Raw review. Right now, I just want to keep things rolling because we got plenty more to cover on this show. And we're still barely an hour in. I really don't want to spend time prolonging the conversation on this Jake Roberts-Jerry Lawler match. I've been dreading having to review this one. This to me was always one of those feuds that just screamed, why go there? You know what I mean? Look, I loved heel Jerry Lawler in Memphis. The guy was incredibly witty. He was a natural at getting heat on himself. But I even remember saying, you know, right when they started teasing the stuff with Lawler calling out Roberts for his alcoholism and substance abuse problems, it was never even a case of them being tasteless or crude. It was just an objectively bad program from the start. We've barely seen Jake Roberts on television as it is. The whole feud has been Lawler mocking and ridiculing Jake on commentary any chance he gets, which you had to think was being done to set up the eventual blow-off where Roberts would eventually come back and slaughter Jerry in like 90 seconds flat. I mean, the feud pretty much wrote itself. Well, naturally, that's precisely the thing that didn't happen. Plus, you factor in that Jake was barely capable of doing anything physical by this point anyway. The fact that Lawler had go-away heat with me during this time. There were just so many little things that got in the way of this program ever working out. As was the case with a lot of Lawler's work in the WWF. It was just way too much. Overproduced and overdone. Sports entertainment turned up to about 1,000. He's out there in a Ravens jersey, poking fun at all the Cleveland fans. It's cheap heat. It's sports references that went completely over my head. You know, I guess the heat came from the fact that the Ravens moved from Cleveland to Baltimore because they were fed up with the shitty town and bad management. Sounds about right. Meanwhile, he's holding 2 bottles of Jim Beam and making all these obscure references to people that I barely had any knowledge of. It's just, again, dude, theatrics and overproduction. And this went on for a very long time. Like, he's out there talking and talking and talking. I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, dude, we still have an hour plus left in this pay-per-view. Can he just get to the goddamn point? He starts getting on Mark Henry's case at ringside because, you know, he came down to do commentary for this match. Never really said a whole lot. He just kind of sat there and watched. But they're obviously setting up the feud with these two for next month, so I get that. Finally, Jake comes down to shut him up, at which point Lawler tries to strike a peace offering with Roberts. He knows that Jake has the giant python in his bag, but if he agrees not to open his bag, Lawler will show everybody what's in his bag, which he then reveals to be an oversized bottle of wine. Comically oversized, I might add. As in, this probably would be illegal to sell in most distribution centers. And so Roberts spends about 80% of the match beating the teetotal fuck out of Lawler, which immediately should have started sending off warning bells. And, yeah, fuck it, I'll just cut to the chase. Lawler strikes Roberts in the throat with one of the Jim Beam bottles. Doesn't break, by the way. And then he grabbed Jake's testicles and used them as leverage to steal the pin. Yes, I know what I just said. Watch the tape if you think I'm exaggerating. Lawler grabbed a hold of the man's penis, and he applied upward pressure in order to gain leverage. That is what happened. So this sucked. As if I hadn't already alluded to that earlier. And I'm aware they're about to do Lawler and Henry in a month, so they probably needed to put Lawler over here. Still doesn't mean I have to like the booking call. You know, like, after all the crap Lawler was saying about Roberts for months on television, I don't think Roberts ever got his revenge. The only thing we got was a flat finish and having to see Lawler dump a bottle of liquor down Jake's throat. Yeah, this did not work. And to think the whole thing was being done to basically set up Mark Henry versus Jerry Lawler at In Your House, that makes the whole thing even more egregious. But now we come to the two matches on this SummerSlam card that most people often remember, for good and bad. And we'll start with the one many consider the good one. The Boiler Room Brawl between The Undertaker and Mankind. A revolutionary concept at the time that, in retrospect, had technology and camera equipment been more up to snuff, probably would have come off a lot better in execution. Most people probably don't even remember the stipulation for this thing. The fact that it wasn't even pinfall or submission. It was whoever obtains possession of the urn wins the match. And again, if you're smart to the business, the visual of seeing Paul Bearer standing in the ring holding the urn, I mean, that should have given you clear signs as to what was coming. Swerve. God, there's so much to talk about when it comes to breaking down this match. Let me just get the big talking point out of the way, because I know this is kind of a polarizing issue for a lot of people out there. Does the match hold up all these years later? Now that we've lived through the Attitude Era and ECW and all the crazy batshit stuff guys have done to their bodies throughout the years, you go back to try to watch a match like this impartially, having seen so much of that car wreck stunt show footage over the years. It's arguably a little hard to say it still holds up. For me, it was always a bitter pill because, as much as I love the Undertaker-Mankind feud, as much as I love seeing those two work together, when I saw this for the first time, I legitimately thought it was one of the coolest things I ever saw. It seemed very raw and authentic during a time where, the WWF wasn't really experimenting with this kind of stuff all that often. I mean, they were just kind of dipping their toe in the pool when it came to backstage brawls and any kind of street fight. And we had already seen backstage fights occasionally, but nothing like this. I mean, this was truly a revolutionary concept for the time. Now, the fortunate thing for me is that I was watching on pay-per-view, so despite the technical glitches we were seeing in the boiler room itself, the fans in the building really got fucked. Keep in mind, this is 1996. The WWF barely had functioning jumbotrons at this time. I think there was a jumbotron in the building here for the fans in the nosebleeds to look at. But the only other visual the fans had for the boiler room part of the fight were the 4 TV monitors at ringside they were broadcasting the pay-per-view feed from. And if you know anything about old school television monitors from the 90s, these were not high-tech monitors. These were quite pitiful, in fact. And you can even hear the people, when they lost the feed inside the boiler room, and all you got was static feed on the camera, everybody in the building started booing. Because at that point, they were just sitting there with nothing to do. There was no action going on in the ring, except for Paul standing there with the urn. I guess if he really wanted to entertain people, he could have started doing magic tricks. But that's always my bone of contention when I go back and watch this match. There were so many things to like about it at the time, but because we've seen virtually everything and the kitchen sink being thrown at us since that point, the match does kind of suffer as a result. And of course, now that I'm older and I understand the inner workings of the business, there's so many things that I think about now that I never would have considered even watching as a kid. I'm just trying to rationalize in my head how something like this would ever get co-signed in real life. How in the fuck did they get permission from the building staff to let these two have a street fight inside a room that could have conceivably destroyed the entire building? Like, you know what I mean? I know I'm being way too practical and overthinking the fuck out of this to a ridiculous degree, but suspension of disbelief is a little much in this scenario. Can you imagine Vince having that conversation with the property manager? Hey, pal, is it all right if 2 of our talents fight inside an extremely dangerous dark room and potentially cause damage to the water heaters that run the building? Well, I can't feasibly see what could go wrong in that scenario. Sure. What the hell? Tell them to have fun. Use whatever tools and implements you want. It's just so ludicrous. But of course, everything about this match is ludicrous. That's why people remember it so well. I still like the fact that despite that the entire room is comprised of nothing but wires, water heaters, electric box outlets, and PVC pipes, they still found a way to conveniently place a fucking garbage can lid on the ground for someone to get hit over the head with. I know I'm just ruining the immersion for all the sycophants. Nobody will ever be able to enjoy this match again now that I've exposed how ridiculous it all was. I mean, I don't even want to think about all the crap these two are rolling around in. Those dirty floors, the asbestos that was probably circulating in the room, the broken glass everywhere. There were so many questionable health choices that were completely overlooked in this. It's even worse when you consider both guys had open cuts on their arms by the end of this thing. I seriously am shocked that nobody died as a result of this. It really is kind of a two-part sequence when you look at how it was all produced. You had the boiler room fight itself, which was what it was. And then you had the stuff where both guys were fighting to get to the ring to try to grab the urn from Paul. I always did like the visual of the boys watching from the hallway as they were fighting to the ring. It was a cool little feature. And as far as the angle that led up to the swerve with Paul, it's one of those things that I didn't see coming as a kid. But now having gone back and listened to the commentary, not to mention the way Paul was standing there reacting to everything, it's a little more obvious that something was about to happen. Because you had the spot where Taker launches Foley onto the exposed concrete, and Vince is on commentary going, "All Taker has to do is get in the ring and grab possession of the urn and it's over." And you're just like, can you make it any more apparent that The Undertaker's about to get fucked? Sure enough, he and Mankind brawl in the ring for another couple minutes. Taker goes to try to grab the urn from Paul, but then Paul slowly backs away into the corner as Mankind unloads on him. And you see Paul cradling the urn, big old grin on his face, and he's watching as The Undertaker is getting destroyed. And eventually you get the big reveal that Paul was secretly planning to join Mankind the whole time. It was a good angle. And really clever. You know, especially in the sense that nobody ever really talked about Paul Bearer picking or choosing sides in this storyline. It was never anything they blatantly talked about on camera. So when you do get Paul turning on Taker at the end, people were genuinely shocked. And of course, having done our coverage of Percy from the time in World Class, we all know how much of a heat magnet he is. I loved heel Paul Bearer, and I thought him and Foley were a perfect unit together. Again, it's boring enough for me to want to sit here and go over everything spot for spot, but I'm not here to talk about everything with a fine-tooth comb. You know, that's not what this channel is about. I'm not a moves guy. But I do think it's an interesting conversation to have, because I'm still conflicted all these years later. I still enjoy moments to this match, even when I get over the whole suspension of disbelief problem. You know, I can still kind of sit back and enjoy it for what it is. I appreciate the concept of what they were trying to do at the time, because it was innovative. But it's hard for me, even as a die-hard Undertaker mark, it's hard to justify this match 30 years later. You know, especially with everything that went into the planning and how it all kind of turned out in execution. I think the company was in a little over their heads here. You know, this is their attempt at the cinema era of the WWE from the scamdemic period, with about 20% of the technology to do it properly. A lot of people still love this match and consider it a SummerSlam classic. I'm not really somebody that falls into that camp. it's a classic and that people still remember it and talk about it all these years later. But, people still also talk about Vader versus Shawn from the main event, and that's not particularly a good thing. So what do you say we talk about it? Since I've opened that can of worms, may as well. It's Vader time. It's Vader expiration time. So Shawn Michaels versus Vader for the WWF Championship. There's been so much said about this match over the years, from fans and experts alike. And I've already shared some of my collective thoughts in the build-up to this on television. The way Shawn carried himself during the program. The fact that he visibly didn't want anything to do with Vader. The fact that Vader was clearly and patently trying to play it safe because he'd been browbeat over and over again by Shawn about loosening up and not being stiff. Of course, if you know anything about Vader, especially having watched his work in Japan, that was kind of his style. Not in a reckless way, it was Vader. He didn't work the WWE style, which is ultimately why he didn't work out there. Bear in mind, too, none of this was conducive to executing a good wrestling match. It's one thing not to work stiff. It's another thing to make it so patently obvious you're not trying to hurt somebody, which is precisely what Vader was doing anytime he gave Shawn a move in this match. And whereas normally I try not to dwell on breaking everything down move for move, this is one of those examples of a match where when you actually watch the thing in real time, you just know instinctually that something's off, that it's not going to be any good. I mean, within the first minute and a half, you got Shawn out there thinking he's Road Warrior Hawk. He's trying to dominate and overpower a guy twice his size by getting down on his knees and throwing jabs at Vader's head. Meanwhile, Vader's bending over backwards to protect Shawn with every blow he gives him, to the point where it's just absurd. Like, even when Vader was supposed to be getting the heat on Shawn in this match, facially you can just tell that Shawn wasn't in the mood to cooperate or even sell for Vader. I actually forgot about this spot. This is hilarious when I went back and saw it again. There was supposed to be a deal where Vader went to grab Shawn as he was skinning the cat on the ropes. And he basically grabbed a hold of Shawn like he was going to try to yank him into the ring from a tombstone position. But I guess Shawn wasn't on board with either taking a tombstone from Vader or even being held up in that position. So you get this hysterical moment where Vader's 69ing Shawn. He's got him basically pressed overhead while his head is buried in Shawn's crotch. He's essentially giving him a blowjob. That's what's going on there. And then he just poof, gently dumps him on the mat as lightly as humanly possible. That was amazing. I totally neglected that part of the match. But of course, Then we get the spot that the match is most notorious for, even before the whole overbooked clusterfuck at the finish. So Shawn's firing up a little bit, and because they still had a bunch of other stuff planned out, this is where Shawn got sideways and just totally started acting unprofessional and throwing a tantrum. It was supposed to be the spot where Shawn had Vader set up for the elbow drop. But of course, the story goes that Vader had a brain fart and forgot he was supposed to move out of the way when Shawn was coming down. Now, never mind the fact that it's not like they ever established the elbow drop as Shawn's finish. God forbid he could have just hit the fucking elbow drop, and they could have ad-libbed something to get to the next spot. But because Shawn was coked out of his mind and a total unprofessional dickwad, no, of course he had to throw the temper tantrum like an unprofessional bitch and act like a third-grade kid on the playground who got punished for playing too rough with the others. So he comes down. Vader doesn't move. Shawn lands on his feet and immediately starts punting Vader in the side of the head as a shoot. Everybody can audibly hear him screaming, "Move! Move!" And in between him screaming "move," he's just kicking Vader in the side of the head as hard as humanly possible. You know, that one spot there, it's amazing to me because I've seen this match I don't know how many thousands of times over the years. Every time I go back and see that clip, every time I get to this part of the match, it never ceases to infuriate me. You know, when we started the whole retro review series, I was kind of going over specific periods and timelines. This particular pay-per-view came up in my thought process because it's just such an infamously bad moment. And I knew at some point we were going to have to talk about it. For me, it's always a bitter pill because I've obviously been on record talking about my complete disgust, revulsion for Shawn Michaels during this time frame. I mean, he had go-away heat with me in the late 90s, to the same degree that Jerry Lawler did. But the Shawn thing is always frustrating to me because, you know, when he went away and got the back surgery, came back in the mid-2000s, I sort of had a reconciliation for Shawn because he did prove to me over time that when he came back, he had changed, that he'd become a different person. And you can say what you want, him using the religious argument to bail himself out. But there was never anything between mid to late 2000 that Shawn ever did that would give me the impression that he hadn't changed. There were periodic moments where he was kind of weird. I always think back to the SummerSlam match with him and Hulk Hogan. Yeah, he was a little bit petulant during that time period. But it was nothing to the extent of what we saw with him from like 95 through 98. And it's moments like this where when I go back and see the footage again, he makes it really, really hard to justify that second chance. astonishing when I go back and see this moment. Because really, what do you say? How in the fuck anybody in that company let Shawn get away with this? It's beyond me. I mean, Vader's one thing. He could have easily stood up for himself here. I mean, that guy could have folded up Shawn like origami if he wanted to. Problem was that Vader basically feared for his job, knowing that Shawn had already gone to the office to complain about not wanting to work with him because he was too stiff. So he didn't want to stir the pot. But Vince? Bruce Pritchard? Pat Patterson? Anybody in upper management? It is just beyond baffling to me that Shawn never got reprimanded for this. On live pay-per-view, no less. Pulling that kind of stunt. I mean, by that point, it threw off the psychology of the rest of the match. Now that things were really going well before the Shawn outbreak. But then you get all the nonsense at the finish where Shawn and Vader take the bump out to the floor. And because Shawn's still in a mood, he has to face palm the camera. Again, a total bitch move. So Vader ultimately wins by countout. But then Cornette gets on the mic and starts demanding the match be restarted because they want to win the title. They don't want a DQ or a countout finish. So you get the match being restarted. They do some stuff for a while until Jim Cornette tries to get involved with the tennis racket. And that's when Shawn gets into some hot water with Cornette personally. As you see him just whipping the shit out of him with that gimmick racket. And yeah, I know the thing was gimmicked, but Jesus Christ. Shawn was just killing Jim with that thing. I actually felt bad for the guy. And then you get the DQ finish where they basically replay the same angle they did with the count-out deal. Only this time, Cornette's completely blown up and barely able to speak. And so, after they do the count-out restart, after they do the DQ restart, after they've gone through the entire trilogy here in less than 10 minutes, it's at this point where Vader tries to set up Shawn for the moonsault. After Shawn had been savagely destroyed and massacred for the previous 10 minutes, well, then he just moves out of the way, completely no-sells the beating from earlier, and then he gives Vader the moonsault out of the corner for the 1-2-3. Boom. Flat in the middle of the ring. Just totally made Vader look like a dork. Gotta get my boomer throat clear out of the way there. People often overuse or even misuse the term burial in wrestling. Make no doubt, what Shawn did to Vader on this show was the embodiment of a wrestling burial. It wasn't even the simple fact that Vader lost the match, despite all the chicanery and overbooking that went on. It was the fact that this effectively marked the end of Vader's run as the main event top heel in the WWF. He never recovered from this loss. He was immediately pegged down on the roster. Shawn deliberately sabotaged Vader here and made him look like a piece of shit. There's no other way to look at it. And anybody that tries to tell you this wasn't meticulously done to ruin any chance of Vader remaining a top guy in the promotion, they're lying. Flat out. And you know what? Fuck it, I'll say it. Vince McMahon is every bit as accountable for this as Shawn was. He had the ability to put his foot down and punish Shawn for pulling this crap on live pay-per-view. He knew what he was dealing with when it came to Shawn around this time. The bad attitude, the unprofessionalism, but he did nothing about it. He let it slide. And he let his top world champion sabotage a major pay-per-view main event just to satisfy and appease his over-bloated, overrated ego. That's what happened. So fuck Vince for letting Shawn get away with this crap. And you know, fuck anybody that ever tries to suggest this is a great match or even anything worth considering good. You know how people often say there are no wrong opinions, just subjective ones? That is completely untrue. And this scenario proves it. If you're somebody that, for whatever reason, thinks this is a good match, you are objectively wrong. Your opinion is wrong. And you should probably stop watching wrestling. So how'd I do? Did I do an effective enough job with that rant? Or did I only scratch the surface? I could go on. And there's plenty more to say. It's just everything you've ever heard me complain about with Shawn during this time. The unprofessionalism, bad attitude, demeanor, the petulant behavior, everything. It was all encapsulated here. This justifies everything I've ever said about why Shawn was terrible for the WWF bottom line. And I know that's a really difficult thing for Shawn Michaels fans to hear. You can admire the athleticism all you want. But stuff like this, these kinds of things are just inexcusable in the wrestling business. Protect your opponent at all costs. And work in a manner that doesn't expose the business and gives people the illusion that the guy you're hitting is somebody you actually hate. Shawn broke both of those cardinal rules here. Willingly. And for that, he can go fuck himself. As can this pay-per-view. SummerSlam 96 to me is one of the all-time worst SummerSlam events. I don't know if that's common agreement among most fans out there, but I absolutely despise this pay-per-view. To me, it is 1,000 times worse than SummerSlam 95. And that show sucked too. But this is a whole other dimension of bad. What this should have been was Vince's wake-up call. Should have been him saying, we're getting our asses handed to us right now by the competition, and it's all because I've thrown all my eggs into this one basket. A basket case, no less. Someone that clearly doesn't have our company's best interest at heart, and he's only in it to get himself over at the expense of everything and everybody else. I need to shift gears and start thinking about elevating a new top babyface. Because this Shawn Michaels run ain't it. Now, of course, he did eventually create a new top babyface to take Shawn's place. The problem was he waited another full calendar year before doing it. And that was his critical mistake. He still had faith. Still wanted to ride that Shawn Michaels wave. Even after he lost his smile. Wink, wink. And for all the people that are going to sit there and argue, oh, well, they did punish Shawn as a result of this. They took the belt off of him at Survivor Series. They took the belt off of him for approximately 2 months before immediately putting it back on him again. That wasn't punishment. That was them trying to fix an already pre-planned trilogy between Shawn and Vader that didn't work out. Real punishment would have been permanently keeping the belt away from Shawn and making him prove that he deserved to even sniff the ass crack of the title picture ever again. That's what should have happened. Instead, we got a 2-month title reign with Psycho Sid, which ended with him dropping the belt right back to Shawn at the Royal Rumble in January. And it got so much heat with the people, they booed Shawn out of the fucking building in the Garden, despite him going into that match as the babyface. That's officially what happened. Don't ever forget that. So what do we have going on the night after SummerSlam? Aside from a butt ton of shitty content. See what I did there? No, actually, I'll tell you what. This is a show tailor-made for one Mr. Tony Khan. Because you know what this show had booked? Tournaments. And if there's one thing we know about Cocaine Nutjob himself, guy loves his tournaments. So I'm sure 10-year-old Tony Khan was just fapping off at the idea of getting some tournament matches on television this week. In reality, Tony was probably watching Nitro Live during this time. The guy's a whack job, but he's not that wacky to want to sit there and subject himself to WWF Raw in 1996. Not live, at least. At least VHS gave him the opportunity to fast forward through all the junk. Now, we kind of touched on this with the pay-per-view recap, but they did kickstart a tournament to crown a new Intercontinental Champion. Now that we know Ahmed Johnson's going to be out for the foreseeable future. And for all the shit people give TK about his goofy obsession with tournaments, at least he actually put some forethought into the brackets he books. On occasion. There's usually some math involved. And or graphs. But get a load of these fucking brackets for this tournament. There's 8 people in it. In round 1, we have the following names: Owen Hart versus Davey Boy. 2 members of Camp Cornette being forced to wrestle one another for reasons that were never explained. Steve Austin versus Mark Marrow. At least that makes a little bit of storyline sense given their history. Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Psycho Sid. Because this company just loves ribbing Hunter. And Savio Vega versus Farouk. I understand the talent pool was very thin in 1996. I know we weren't exactly dealing with the best pick of the litter. This is a shitty-ass tournament. The sad thing is, this is basically WWF's middle/upper middle card roster at the moment. Hard times. So we got Owen and Davey in the opener for Raw this week. By the way, Kevin Kelly and JR filled in on commentary. Lawler was also there, but I tried to ignore him as much as possible throughout the duration of the show. It actually wasn't a bad commentary team. The problem with having JR and Kevin Kelly out there at the same time was that both of them were effectively filling in as play-by-play guys. But with Lawler still being there, I don't know, poor JR just kind of looked like the spare prick at the wedding at times. I think I mentioned before, back when I did the G1 review on the channel a few years ago, I was never the biggest fan of Kevin Kelly on commentary. He just, I don't know. He never clicked with me in the same way guys like Jim Ross or Gordon Soley or even a Bill Watts clicked for me. Personal taste, I guess. I was just never a Kevin Kelly guy. I never got the hype. Nice guy, but nah. I know that'll immediately get heat with the internet community. But he called New Japan. Fuck off. Nobody watches New Japan anymore. So when you take into account this is Owen Davey, which meant the match was essentially heel versus heel, kind of made it hard for the crowd to figure out who to cheer for. It was still a well-worked professional wrestling match. I had fun with it. I did have a good laugh at the point where the fans tried to start a Nitro Sucks chant. And of course, at the precise moment that chant begins, it's when Davey has Owen down in a stationary chin lock. Not when they were doing anything fast-paced. Not when they were going 100 miles an hour and doing all these crowd-pleasing spots. No, it was at the least interesting part of the whole fucking match. I did like JR's Freudian slip moment where he accidentally called the sharpshooter the Scorpion Deathlock. Hopefully he didn't get reamed too hard for that one. So, they're out there having this good back and forth match. Right before the break spot, Sonny came out to join the already overcrowded announce booth. When they come back, both guys are fighting on the floor over by the announcers. And that set up the angle where Owen goes back to break the count in the ring, but Davey was still trying to recover. At the same time, he also basically had his head up Sonny's skirt because they were right on top of each other. hell of a time to use that metaphor when I'm talking about Sonny. He was on top of her. Figuratively. Anyway, so Owen wins by countout. Then Sonny threw a cup of soda in Davy's face, claiming he's a pervert and purposefully shoved his head up Sonny's dress. And while that part was kind of silly and ridiculous, it did lead to a great altercation between her and Cornette where he looked her square in the face and called her a, quote, little slut. Which they did not censor. I have to presume that was corny acting in the heat of the moment. But maybe there was a little bit of on-screen tension between those two. Who knows? I know they worked in Smoky Mountain together, but still. Sonny had a reputation by this point, and I'm sure Jim knew about it. So after they went through the whole Ahmed timeline and showed the beatdown from Farouk several weeks ago, they also played another clip from his sit-down interview with Kevin Kelly where he was mentioning something pertaining to the IC title. I had no clue what the fuck he was saying. It's Ahmed Johnson. Guy always sounded like he had a mouthful of marbles. They also showed Mark Henry signing autographs at ringside. For whatever reason, his theme song is the Stars and Stripes fanfare. I don't remember that. Because he was in the Olympics? Sure. So then we had Vader versus Freddie Joe Floyd. 24 hours removed from Vader getting fucked out of the WWF title. No longer in title contention. This is what they had Vader doing on TV. Beating up poor Tracy Smothers in a 90-second squash. You know, the bigger picture in all this was the deal where they kept fucking with the house lights and doing the staticky thing with the camera to make it seem like it was glitching out. They actually did this during the Owen Davey match, too. The announcers were insinuating that it was the magical spirit of The Undertaker. And I'll tell you what, man. Very few people in the wrestling industry could ever get away with making that comment. Jim Ross was among the very, very few on that short list. But it did tie into the next segment. We had JR out there interviewing Mankind and his now new manager, Paul Bearer. And they're here to talk about the Boiler Room Brawl. What went down in the Boiler Room Brawl at the Gund Arena? And the bigger question, now that we've had 24 hours to reflect, why, Paul, why? Why throw 6 years of friendship and legacy out the window? Well, as it turns out, now we know where John Cena stole his heel promo from earlier this year. He stole it from Paul Bearer from Raw 29 years ago. I'm not kidding you. Paul's explanation for turning on The Undertaker at SummerSlam was, I was sick of being abused. Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta do it in the Paul voice. I was sick of being abused. Yes. He was tired of carrying The Undertaker on his back and being mentally ill-treated for it. You know, I said I was on board with the Paul Bear heel turn, mostly because of the fact that nobody saw it coming. I think we now know why. It's because they didn't really put a lot of thought into it. So as the arena lights are flickering and Paul's beginning to show concern, he assures us that Mankind now holds the power of The Undertaker, now that he carries the urn. So that turned the conversation over to Shawn Michaels. We know Mankind is wrestling Shawn at In Your House for the WWF title in September. And I'll be honest with you, I had a really hard time following whatever the hell Foley was trying to say here. The only thing I got out of it was him promising to make Shawn the least most sexy boy of all time. I love that quote. He basically promised he would leave In Your House as the new WWF champion. So as Paul and JR are going back and forth on how everybody in the building can feel the presence of The Undertaker, we eventually hear Taker's gong, or as Brian Alvarez once famously coined, Taker's dong goes off. This next part is absolutely phenomenal. And before I say anything else, let me just go on record when I tell you, A, everything I'm about to repeat actually happened. I'm not making a lick of it up. And B, no, it doesn't completely invalidate anything good I've ever said about The Undertaker as a talent, despite how campy it all was. So while there's a blackout in the arena, they start playing the ominous chant music as the Druids start carrying Taker's lifeless body over their shoulders. And it's at this point where Paul Bear indicates that what we're seeing right now is all part of his ploy. This is not, in fact, the real Undertaker. The real Undertaker is gone and buried. The maggots and the worms are eating away at his rotting flesh as we speak. What we are seeing right now is nothing more than a dead carcass. So the Druids do the long descend down the aisleway. They gently rest the Undertaker at the bottom of the ramp. He is sprawled out in dead man's position. And by this point, I'm just kind of waiting for the inevitable to happen because I know exactly what's coming, having seen my fair share of Undertaker segments. Unsurprisingly, Taker does the zombie sit-up. Huge fucking pop. The biggest pop out of anybody in the venue is Kevin Kelly. I think he pooped himself. And of course, it's not enough to get The Undertaker sitting up and spoofing Mankind and Paul. He also shoots lightning and fire from the corner turnbuckle posts. Because, well, much like Kane, he has the natural ability to do that. It's totally not staged or phony. And so the heels powder as Taker does the 1,000-yard stare. JR informs us that The Undertaker is, quote, alive and well. And, Taker is slowly forming into one of my more favored versions of his look, going back to the late 90s. He's already doing the more slick back thing with his hair now, as opposed to leaving everything down in front of his face. So you can now actually see his facial reactions. It is about to get a whole lot more hokey and stagey in terms of production. Wait until Russo gets his hands on him. But it's like I've always said, man. The Undertaker was a one-of-a-kind gimmick. If anybody was talented enough to pull it off, Mark Calloway was that guy. And it's like I talked about during the SummerSlam recap. Love the Taker-Foley feud. Anything they ever did together, the work between the two was always impeccable. Still not a huge fan of the Boiler Room Brawl in retrospection, but I understand why for many people it's still considered a classic. You know what I wouldn't consider a classic? Barry Windham returning to the WWF as the Stalker. All right, let me pause because I know everybody's going to be asking, what in the blue fuck are you talking about? Hey, I'm just recapping the vignette. I just work here, brother. Don't ask me. I didn't book it. Here's the funny part. I remember Barry Windham coming back to the WWF for the second run. I remember the new Blackjacks. I completely forgot about the Stalker gimmick. Another blink and you miss it failed experiment. The funny part too is I even recall vaguely seeing old clips of Barry from house shows when he was doing the Stalker gimmick. Can't remember if he ever made a single pay-per-view or even TV appearance in that getup. He looked like if Spike Dudley was actually a fully grown man. I know that was horrible. I had to say it though. It was too good to pass on. At the same time, though, I'm not entirely joking. That's what Barry Windham kind of looked like. He had camouflage pants with a dark tank top, blonde hair that was similar length to Spike's. It was kind of amazing. And I don't recall what happened. But much like a lot of other bad gimmicks from around this period, one day Vince just decided, fuck it. It's not getting over, pal. So he dropped it. Then Barry showed up the next day as Bradshaw's tag team partner. The wacky world of the WWF, man. What can you say? So much stuff, so much history that people just totally wiped from memory because it was so forgettable. So then we get this next match. Boy, was this a doozy. Okay, so let me see if I got my facts straight here. It's a second chance four-way with the four individuals that were part of that Battle Royal 2 weeks ago that Ahmed won. The Battle Royal that was supposed to determine Shawn's next challenger after SummerSlam. The one that they ultimately false advertised. It's Goldust versus Savio Vega versus Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Psycho Sid. And actually, I'm wrong. It wasn't a fatal four-way. It's a sudden death battle royal. So it's over the top rules, despite there only being four guys here. So in essence, they were basically replaying the closing minutes of the same match we saw on television 2 weeks ago. And apparently the winner of this match is getting the title shot on what they're coining Championship Friday, which, as I found out, is a taped Raw they'll be airing on Friday, September 6th. So within a matter of about 20 seconds, Savio Austin and Goldust triple team Sid to dump him out. which Sid immediately sells by getting back in the ring and chokeslamming all three guys to lay them out like jobbers, and getting arguably the biggest reaction out of anything that happened in the match. So suffice it to say, not a wise booking call to eliminate Sid that early. So they come back from break where all three guys are going at it. Crowd is lackadaisical, to say the least. Eventually, Savio gives Austin the slingshot and catapults him over the top. Then a few minutes later, Savio misses a running charge at Goldust and gets backdropped to the floor. So Goldust gets the title shot. And that really doesn't bode well for Shawn, because we all know what Team Goldust plays for. And with Shawn being a sex symbol for a lot of people out there, you know Goldust is licking his chops at the opportunity to get his hands on that. If you know what I'm saying. Bear in mind, everybody, the reason they ran this back a second time is because Ahmed got hurt and couldn't compete for the title. So they had a do-over here. You think about the four individuals in this match. Of all people to put over, how in the fuck did they not have Austin go over here? Think about it. The guy won King of the Ring in June. He had a little bit of steam behind him coming out of that pay-per-view. He had the feud with Savio, which, while it wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, they had some good matches together. And he has naturally started to get himself over and become more of an on-screen presence. So he's doing considerably well. For a throwaway TV match, try to capitalize on Austin's momentum. How did they willingly pass on that opportunity? Just to go with Goldust of all people. I mean, no offense to Dustin, but was anybody really clamoring for a Shawn Michaels Goldust title match? With Austin and Shawn, at least there would have been a little more intensity and macho attitude, as opposed to what will evidently be Goldust trying to grope Shawn for 10 minutes straight. Even Sid versus Shawn would have had a bigger fight feel, considering how crazy over Sid was with the people. I mean, you're already doing the match in November anyway at Survivor Series. Just give the people a little taste of it. You don't have to do a clean finish. Yeah, it's babyface versus babyface, but who gives a fuck? You just booked a heel versus heel match on this very show. It's not like the WWF has ever avoided face versus face or heel versus heel pairings. Did it all the time during the mid to late 90s. I don't know. Odd choice to have Goldust win. That's all I'm saying. I know my fantasy booking mentality came out a bit there, but I don't think I'm entirely off base. The idea that the wrong guy won. Speaking of wins, guess who won the Shawn Michaels versus Yokozuna main event? The correct answer was not the fans, because they had to sit there and experience it. Oh, poor Yoko. This was just such a sad way to end it all. Remember that match these two had earlier in the year? And I was convinced that I was watching the actual final match for Yokozuna in the WWF. Well, it's because I remember Yokozuna's final TV match being against Shawn. I just didn't realize they'd wrestled twice on television in the year 1996. But this was the true final TV appearance for Yoko. I think he still went on to wrestle a couple more house show matches through the remainder of the year. But by January of 97, I think that's when they sent Yoko home so he could try to get his weight under control, which evidently backfired and ultimately led to him getting released. It's just... It's really depressing when you look at how that whole thing went down. I mean, the company truly bent over backwards to try to help Yoko out. They gave him an entire calendar year to lose weight and get himself in better shape. And he couldn't do it. And they wouldn't clear him. Of course, you fast forward a couple more years and you start to get the reports coming out about his death. You know, by this point, I don't think there was really any way to salvage it. I mean, we were talking about Yoko's physical decline in like 1994. At least back then he was still reasonably motivated. So he could get by despite the fact that he was only getting bigger and less agile. But watching this match with him and Shawn is always a tough challenge. Yeah, I've seen this match a lot over the years, and it never gets any easier. I mean, it was so bad at this point, they couldn't even give the thing more than 5 minutes. And even by the end, Yoko was still winded and gasping for air. I can only imagine how hard it was for Cornette to put him over right before the match began. Try as he might. Even Corny knew how bad Yoko's physical state was. So they got through it as best they could. The big angle took place at the end when JC came out to sucker punch Jose Lothario. That basically led to fuck all and nothing, because Shawn just made his comeback on Yoko less than a minute later. They did do a cool little swerve at the end when Yoko countered the super kick and gave Shawn the Samoan drop. That was actually a cool little reversal, especially because Shawn's finish was so well protected by that point. But again, you fast forward 30 seconds, Shawn rolls out of the way of the leg drop and gives Yoko the sweet chin anyway. The whole thing was rushed. By the time Shawn got the pin, they were already pitching to the end credits because they were so pressed for time. For me, I was still fuming over that main event from the pay-per-view. The last visual I needed to see was Shawn getting clean pinfalls over guys twice his size. So that made me even more furious. But even when you remove my personal bias from the equation, I think this was more so about the fact that it was one of the final on-screen appearances for Yokozuna. In fact, I think this was it. Outside house shows and indie dates after his release, this is pretty much the last big usage of Yokozuna in any on-screen capacity. It's really disheartening. Because I always liked Yokozuna growing up. He and Cornette were great together. The tag team with him and Owen. Even though it kind of gets a bad rap, I still enjoy the match with him and Brett from WrestleMania 10 in the Garden. But, yeah, this is not my favorite time to be watching Yoko in the ring. This is a weird show. I honestly can't make heads or tails of what I thought about this episode. It wasn't a great show, but compared to last week's stink bomb, Anything was an improvement over that. It's the fallout to a pay-per-view, so you had to figure there was going to be a little bit of a reset with stuff. At least the show was watchable for a change. Owen and Davey was good, despite the crappy finish. The Taker Mankind stuff is silly, but it kind of worked in its own unique way. I hate to use the Dave Meltzerism, but it worked for the room. The four-way was just a complete waste of time in my book. And I still don't get the decision to have Goldust win the title shot, but who am I to say? They've got a main event for In Your House in a month, and it doesn't actually suck on paper. Yeah, I'm still miffed over Shawn burying Vader and essentially blackballing him from title contention as a result. But I've already ranted enough about that fucking abomination. At this point, I'm just milling the wind. But it was a packed Monday show. A lot of stuff to cover this weekend, and I'm glad I actually had the time to do it. So, appreciate everybody that comes back to check out the 5-Star Wrestling Report. And I'll catch you on Friday. False alarm, there actually was not an episode of WCW. At least I wasn't able to find one. So it'll be back to Mid-South and World Class this week. Just those two segments. And that's all I got for the time being. It's going to be a little busy for me over the next several weeks, so just be patient. I'm going to be moving soon. Got a lot of personal stuff I need to get together, so I don't know. There might be a week where I might only do one show. Haven't decided yet. But I'll keep you in the loop about it. Anyway, take care all, and I'll catch you soon. Peace out.